My name is Beth Hofmeister. I'm a lawyer at the Legal Aid Society. I work on our Homeless Rights Project, which means that there are three components of my job. I also work with the legislature a lot, both at the city and state level, mostly with the city council. I bring class action lawsuits against primarily the city of New York, but sometimes the state and other various agencies on behalf of homeless people. And I also work with individuals, primarily homeless teenagers and families with children who reside in the shelter system in New York City. So as most of you probably know, because the Legal Aid Society is enormous, that we do a lot of different kinds of legal services. The biggest ones people know us for relate to criminal defense and representing children in family court. My project is tiny. There are 4 of us who work on it, and technically we are class counsel for every single man, woman, child, gender nonconforming individual in the shelter system in New York City. So what that means is that I'm there to, as the lawyer assigned to those cases, and with the other lawyers that are assigned to those cases, are to make sure that the rights that do exist in New York City for the homeless are upheld. Everyone always asks me, what does that mean? Why do homeless people need lawyers? Besides kind of some of the obvious reasons, New York City is the only municipality in the entire country that has a right to shelter. It's something that those of us who work on those issues are very proud of, because if you think that the homeless population that you see on the streets, particularly in this neighborhood in Midtown South, where I think you have to deal with it in a very I think with the street homelessness issues in a very different way than the majority of the rest of the city, it would be much worse, because I checked the census. DHS, the Department of Homeless Services, posts their census every single day. If you're ever curious, you can track it literally to the person. Was a little over 58,000 last night in shelter, and approximately half of those people in shelter are children. It would be much worse if all those people were living out on the street. The street homelessness population, I double checked too before I got here, but let me pull up the right number. There is a count that's done as required by HUD every single year on the coldest night of the year, which basically means usually in end of January or February. And this past year, they found 2,794 homeless individuals on the street, which is down about 12% from where it was last year, which I think for those of us who are also familiar with the street homeless population is pretty low compared to what, I mean, you might have 2,700 homeless people who stay regularly in this area of the city. It's an important distinction I always talk about, because homelessness in New York really can be categorized into people who are street homeless, and frankly, you did a great job talking about what you as citizens can do if you come across someone when you're concerned or you feel like there might be something going on. You do not have to interject yourself into a situation where you're not really sure what might be going on. Calling 311, particularly with all the new initiatives that are going on around outreach to homeless individuals by the city, is the best and fastest way to get access. I think BRC has been here to speak to you all as well, and they're the primary outreach provider for this area, and particularly for Penn Station. One thing I talked to John and Sharon a lot about is that you also, I think, have a unique problem in this area where not everyone who may be panhandling in this area is actually homeless or homeless in New York City. I always say there's concentric circles. People who are panhandling and are homeless, there are some people where that's the case, but there are many more people who are in your community who are homeless that you probably have no idea are homeless. And then there are also people who are panhandling or asking for money who may actually not be homeless, kind of by the standard definition. So what that basically means is, as long as you know where to go to access services, and again, that is something, while I think advocates, and myself included, would always like to see some parts improved, there's been a very large influx of services and focus on how to address the street homelessness population by the city. The other, I guess, thing I always want to talk about when I come and talk to people about homelessness, and then I want to take any questions that people have, because there usually are a number of them, is just to kind of people always say, well, why is the population going up? Why does this seem to be such an increase that's happening now in particular? If you read John's article, he does touch on a lot of the history, and one of my clients, Coalition for the Homeless, also has a very detailed history, but basically modern homelessness in New York City started in the 70s when, after Geraldo Rivera, who was a young reporter at the time, basically did an expose on how terrible some of the mental health facilities were in New York City, and so they shut them all down but didn't have anywhere else for people to go, which then led to a very large increase in street homelessness, particularly with people who have mental health issues. And there was a young lawyer who stepped over a man who slept on his doorstep pretty much every day, and the man's last name was Callahan, and he brought a case on his behalf in court to establish a right to shelter, which then the Legal Aid Society took over, and then we've taken over and have all the other lawsuits related to that. But that essentially is what established the right to shelter, which then stretched later to women and then to families with children. And there's also another distinction for adult couples, so couples who may not have children but want to reside together, or family members who are related and are medically dependent. And so in the recent history, about 10 years ago, there was a subsidy program that was also ended called Advantage, which once that ended, you can actually see on the graph the shelter population spiked, because New York City is a very expensive city, and for better or for worse, the way that our city has continued to grow is that it's very hard to live here and not make a lot of money. And now it's even hard to live here if you even make a little bit of money, because it's still so difficult. So, as advocates, we spend a lot of time not just dealing with what's going on today with the homeless family, but also how we can help get them into permanent housing and support those efforts, which is something that we're very focused on. And the last thing I'll say too is I think you'll probably come across people who have had really bad experiences in shelter. Right now, with the shelter census as high as it is, it was at the highest levels it was ever in the history of homeless people being counted in New York City, even higher than the Great Depression, like even higher than Hooverville levels was it last year. But it is going down a little bit. But that to always think about, no one sets out wanting to be homeless. I've never met a client who is like, I really always wanted to live in a shelter. That's a goal of mine. And so to, always be thinking about, I think Sharon touched on this a little bit earlier, but there are a lot of reasons why people become homeless, and it's not because they aren't working. A third of the adults in shelter are working full time. About a year ago, 80 of them worked for the city of New York. So these are people that you may be working with in your jobs or maybe coming to your establishments. While certainly a lot of people do have some mental health and some substance abuse issues, a lot of them are just trying to get on their feet and then move back into the communities where they came from and where they want to thrive and flourish. So just to kind of always remember that, half of them are children, and then out of the adults that are in there, there's another third that are working full time, and another chunk that are frankly have a lot of mental health or physical disabilities that prevent them from being able to do that. But these are people who want to be part of the community and are struggling to do so in the way that maybe you and I can do it.
Am I correct in that also some of the day shelters were taken away too, as
the drop-ins,
and that's why we see a lot of
yes.
people on the streets. When did that was the prior administration, I know, but
correct.
Right.
Yeah, and there are some opening up. I don't know if you saw in the news, but there's 2 that are opening up. I feel like one is not far from here. I can double check and send you the information. But drop-in centers are a very important way, particularly during the day, for people who are homeless, who are maybe trying to get back on their feet or trying to access work or just stabilizing, frankly, to get themselves back into the community. A place for them to go, because obviously, everyone can't be hanging around Penn Station or Grand Central or other places, where I think there tends to be some of that activity. So. In general, with the single homeless population, it varies from individual to individual. There is a lot of substance use going on, but in terms of how it compares to the general population, that's not a number I know off the top of my head, but I don't think it's actually that much different. I think a lot of people who are overtly homeless or sleeping rough or sleeping on the street, there are a lot of reasons why some people choose to do that or why they are doing that, and a lot of times it can relate to mental health issues or substance abuse, but actually the vast majority of people who are homeless that's not something that they're battling with, actually. A single adult population is different than families with children, because frankly ACS would get involved if there were major issues in that regard with families with children. But it is a problem, particularly but the same way that K2 is a problem for teenagers in the city. It's, those trends kind of go everywhere at the same time. But I think that certainly issues with retaining or being able to get a job is a huge reason why people are homeless, although a lot of my clients are holding down 2 or 3 jobs. It's just that they might not be able to make more than minimum wage, and so that's a complicating factor. And then obviously, a lot of us, I myself am in a union, and a lot of us maybe work for organizations or places that are unionized, and so you don't have any job protection when you're not an at-will employee. So if part of the difficulty of living in the shelter system is if you have an appointment, with your shelter and they're requiring you to come, it may be the very thing that causes you to lose your job because you're being required to come to an appointment during the day when most of us would be otherwise at work. So those are the kind of things that complicate. I don't know the exact number. That's not something I study in particular, but I will keep Coalition for the Homeless's website has a lot of that information, and then they're a really great resource in general about kind of the statistics around homelessness, specifically in New York City. The good news is there's really not a significant any street homelessness population with children. I mean, you might have heard some things on the news sometimes that there might be a family who sleeps on the train, but that's pretty rare, and I spend a lot of my time and people I work with to make sure that that's not something that happens. So most people would have their kids stay with a family member or friend, even if they have to sleep on the subway. So if you are homeless and you have a legal question, or we actually have a hotline which I can give you or give out also, that anyone at any time who thinks they have a legal issue could call us, and we can either we'll take the case on, or give advice, or a lot of times people think they have a legal issue, but it's not. But yeah, that won't affect our program at all. But it hopefully will impact people in a positive way, although I know it's really hard for small businesses sometimes to make that transition. So it's a double-edged sword. I specialize mostly with homeless teenagers, so I don't work as much specifically with the senior population, but I know Commissioner Banks has made a commitment to open some senior-focused shelters, and that there is also, the housing that is just for homeless seniors is always full because there's always a need for it, and kind of the special circumstances that exist as to why someone who would be considered senior becomes homeless, and what they would need. And where you're transitioning them is also different than kind of the average more middle-aged or younger homeless person. So I actually very rarely deal with that, except for when there are transfer issues pertaining to someone's disability. So I do a lot of ADA, which is the American with Disabilities Act related advocacy, along with my colleagues, to make sure people have access to shelter and services. Quite literally, sometimes that means someone in a wheelchair is put in a shelter that has a walk-up, and then they can't access their space. So it's fixing things as basic as that sometimes. That's gotten much better in recent years, but those are the kind of things we spend time doing. There's a lot of different things, and one of them is that they have very highly trained social workers. And I know that, I believe the NYPD there's a specialized unit in all of the different precincts that focus on it, and I think in a precinct like this those people would have a lot of experience, and so because when you're engaging someone who's street homeless, it's different than even the engagement I'm doing for people who are in shelter.